Hey, Kurious Molecules, welcome back to the channel. We make biochemistry more fun, more relatable, and simpler than you've always known it. So stick around for this video on carbohydrates. Today we'll be talking about one delicious topic, carbohydrates. Because generally when you hear it, you're thinking of a certain type of food that you enjoy, bread, rice, and all the stuff. But today we are looking at it, remember, in a biochemical point of view. So we are looking at the biology and chemistry of carbohydrates. So how would you define carbohydrates? Simply, we define carbohydrates as polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones. We have learned in chemistry the different types or how you classify chemical molecules, and you should have heard of aldehydes and ketones. But now the polyhydroxy here simply means poly means many, and hydroxy OH groups or hydroxyl groups. So carbohydrates are just made up of many of those hydroxy groups or OH groups. That's why we describe them as polyhydroxy aldehydes or ketones. So carbohydrates could be any of those classes, aldehydes or ketone. Carbohydrates follow a general formula which is written as CnH2nOn. It's basically carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a certain ratio. 1:2:1. So if you draw their structure, they will follow this particular ratio, and they'll mostly contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. However, because science loves exceptions a lot, you see that there are exceptions to this particular ratio or particular rule. You would see carbohydrates like the deoxyribose in DNA, which has an oxygen removed from it. That's why you have the deoxy. And this particular carbohydrate would not follow this general formula. So don't think too much. When you hear carbohydrates, chemically speaking, you would just be thinking of carbons holding hands with H2O, which is water. So we have in the diagram an example of a basic or simple carbohydrate made of 3 carbons. We can see there the ketone and the aldehyde group circled. So now we go to the classes of carbohydrates. You know that most molecules in biology, chemistry, are classified, or classification means just putting them in certain groups or classes. And similar to schools, you see class 1, class 2, class 3. Each class has a certain characteristic. Maybe in that class, you have people of a certain age. You have people who have a certain reasoning capacity. They can take in some kind of information and so on. So for carbohydrates too, we have classes. And the classes have maybe similarities in their structure, similarities in their functions. We're talking about monosaccharides, the oligosaccharides and polysaccharides. We know of monosaccharides are the very simple sugars, like glucose, galactose, fructose. Those are basic sugars, and the body prefers to use these as energy or fuel. We have oligosaccharides, usually from 2 to 10 sugar lengths. Oligosaccharides that have 2 sugars in their structure are usually called disaccharides. So in the comment section, I want you to tell me all the disaccharides that you know. And then lastly, we have polysaccharides, which are very long chains from 10 sugars and above. And we know of starch, cellulose, glycogen, and all of that. Starch, for example, is common carbohydrate in our foods. However, polysaccharides are also further divided into homo and hetero. When you hear homo, same thing or similar, although we think of it in the other way. But homopolysaccharides, same type of sugar unit. Like starch, for example, is made up of repeating units of glucose. So the sugar unit is glucose, and it's the same type that is found in the structure. However, heteropolysaccharides have different types of sugars. Sometimes they are even bonded to other molecules, proteins, lipids. So heteropolysaccharides, examples like heparin, they are connective tissue found in blood for blood clotting, and chondroitin sulfate is also a connective tissue found in connective tissue. Okay, now we go to carbohydrate isomers. We have heard of isomerism in chemistry. We can define it as compounds that share the same chemical formula but differ in the arrangement of the atoms. So just think of a dish you're trying to make, maybe jollof rice and fried rice. You could have the very same ingredient, but depending on how you mix them, one gives you jollof and one gives you fried rice. Also, maybe building a house, you have the same number of bricks, you want to build a house. By the end of the day, you build one is a story building and one is just a bungalow. So you have that isomers have the same chemical formula. So the number of atoms and all of that, number of carbons, the number of oxygen for carbohydrates, number of hydrogens will be the same. But how they are structured, there might be a little difference in 1 carbon, 2 carbons, or maybe the arrangement of that carbon. So that's what we're seeing in carbohydrate isomers. That's why, for example, we talked about the basic sugars, the monosaccharides. There are 3 of them, glucose, galactose, fructose. All of those have the same number of carbons in their structure, the same number of hydrogens in their structure, the same number of oxygens, but all of them are not the same. One is glucose, is found in something else. One is fructose, found in something else, and so on. Now we see that they have the same molecular formula, same chemical formula, but there is a difference in, example, the structure. We talked of glucose. We can also talk of stereoisomers, which is the arrangement in space. We have glucose, galactose, and fructose here as an example. Differ in the arrangement around one carbon. So in the comment section, I want you to tell me at what carbon number do glucose and galactose differ. Also, we see enantiomers as another type of stereoisomerism. So we see that enantiomers are mostly just mirror images of each other. We have D-glucose, L-glucose, meaning you could have D-galactose, L-galactose, D-fructose, L-fructose. These enantiomers, in the body, there's a natural existence. There's a structure that is a naturally existing structure in the body. So in the body, would you find glucose as D or L-glucose? I want you to give me the answer in the comments. Okay, so anomers also differ only at a specific carbon called the anomeric carbon. But the difference here is that you see the other structures were Fisher configuration structures or those straight skeleton structures. While these anomers occur in the ring forms of the molecules. That's the deeper part of biochemistry, which we are not going to in this video. Now, most times when you're studying in school, especially biochemistry, course that is so tough, you're like, why do I need this course? Why? So why should you even care about carbohydrates? Because they're your body's literal lifeline. Like they provide you with energy that you need for all the work that you do, mentally, physically, emotionally. Carbohydrates provide the basic energy that you need. For example, glucose. Glucose is a brain's VIP fuel, meaning your brain prefers to use glucose as energy source over lipids, for example. So without carbohydrates, you would feel cranky, always look tired, and so on. Although we'll see that excess of it still gives you similar. Also, carbohydrates play a great role in structure. You'll see them in the cell walls of bacteria, like in the peptidoglycan, the lipopolysaccharides, and all of that. Even in cell membranes of eukaryotic cells, you would see carbohydrates embedded in the cell membrane, so they play a structural role. Also, they are also involved in digestion, like the fiber that we get from cellulose, for example. It helps to ease digestion, preventing constipation, and so on. And we know that carbohydrates play an important role in metabolism. Metabolism is just a combination of all the reactions that occur in the body. And if you check most of the metabolic pathways, carbohydrates are involved. Either they produce intermediates that are used in other metabolic pathways, or they themselves are end products or precursors in metabolic pathways. Carbohydrates are also broken down through metabolic pathways to provide energy, like glucose, which is broken down through glycolysis to provide energy for the body. Also, carbohydrates are very important as structural parts of nucleic acids. And we know that nucleic acids are like the basics of our genes, of our heredity, whatever, how do they call it? Without the DNA, we would maybe not even exist because the genes at the DNA tell the cell to produce, not to produce, to multiply, not to multiply, and so on. So we see how important carbohydrates are. So next time you're struggling to understand a lecture on carbohydrates, or you find a question that you can't answer on carbohydrates, you should not ask yourself, why am I even studying it? It's good you understand your body, understand how the cell works. So next time you grab a bowl of rice, a slice of bread, and you're eating, in your mind, the carbohydrates should not just be that bread that you're eating. You should know that you're fueling the biochemical magic that occurs in your body. We are going to be getting into the more interesting parts of carbohydrates, which is the metabolism later. And thank you very much if you've watched so far. I hope that you really understood and this video helped you to understand carbohydrates basically. And don't forget to like the video if you loved it, of course, and subscribe also. But most of all, don't forget to read the answers to the questions in the comment section below. Comment on other things you would like to see, you want to hear, you want to learn about, and share with other curious molecules who would love to learn, maybe for their